If you've been around YouTube lately, particularly on the finance niche, you've probably seen dozens of videos just like these. They all have the same title and pretty much the exact same thumbnail as well. And they all make the exact same claim that your net worth somehow explodes after you reach 100,000. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably saw this and thought to yourself, well, this doesn't seem to make any sense. Maybe these people know something that I don't. And so I went ahead and watched most of these videos, and surprise, surprise, that claim, in fact, does not make any sense. And so the reason why I decided to make this video is because I think there's two very big problems with that claim. The first one is the claim itself, but the second problem is a much bigger one, in my opinion, because it has a direct impact on people like you and me who tend to watch these influencers and sometimes even follow their advice. And so let's start with the first problem. Is the claim actually true? Does your net worth really explode after you reach 100,000? So the answer is no, it doesn't actually at all. In fact, your net worth doesn't explode after you reach 100,000 any more than it does after you reach 50,000 or 20,000 or 10 or even 1,000 for that matter. At each one of these milestones, your net worth continues to grow at the exact same pace, provided that you do what these people advise us to do in these videos. And so if the claim is not true, then why do they make it? Well, I believe this whole thing comes originally from Charlie Munger, who famously said that the first 100,000 is a and then everything is downhill from there. Now, this, of course, is complete BS, but I believe these YouTubers took that quote at face value and created videos building on that quote. Now, what they're all really talking about is not the power of $100,000, but rather the power of compounding interest. So what does that mean, basically? Well, it means that if you invest a given amount every single month, let's say $1,000, and you get paid an interest on that investment every year, let's say 10%, that'll be 10% APR. And if once you collect that interest payment, you put it back in the bucket and now continue to earn interest on both the money that you're putting in every month and the interest that you're getting paid, that would be the compounding effect, then it's going to take you roughly 7 years to get your first $100,000. If you continue to do this for years to come, then the next 100,000 is going to take you roughly 4.5 years. The next one, 3 years, and so on and so on. And so each 100,000 that you get paid is going to take you less and less time as time progresses. This is not magic. This is obviously going to be the case because the more money you have, the more you're going to get paid in interest. One thing is 10% of, let's say, $10,000. Another thing entirely is 10% of $100,000. So again, the more money you accumulate, the more you're going to get paid in interest, and therefore your net worth is going to grow faster and faster as time progresses. It's not going to grow linearly, but rather exponentially. So as you can see in this graphic right here, this is a compound calculator. You can find them online everywhere. The green line represents the amount of money that you're putting in every month, the $1,000, and the red line represents your net worth. So as you can see, as time progresses, your net worth is going to divert from your actual investment, which means that it's going to grow faster and faster each year to the point where it actually goes parabolic. Now, here's the trick. If I actually change the numbers on this calculation and instead of 1,000, I choose to invest 10 times less than that, let's say $100 every month, the curve is going to look exactly the same. So you see what I mean? It's not really the number what matters. It's the time that you spend invested in the market. That's what makes the difference. As you can see, the numbers change completely in these two examples, but the graphic, the rate at which your net worth increases looks exactly the same. So a much more accurate statement would be to say that it doesn't really matter how much money you're putting in. What matters is how long you manage to stay invested in the market. And the more time you spend in the market, the faster your net worth is going to explode. So that's the first thing. So as you can see, there's really nothing special about 100,000. You could make the same case about 50,000, 73,447, whatever you can think of. Really what matters is the time. And so that's the first problem. But the second problem, which I believe is much more important, is what this means for people like you and me who tend to follow this advice, right? So let's just ask the question, why would we do this? Why would we invest a given amount every single month for years and decades to come? Well, we would do it because we hope that in the future, let's say 25, 30 years, we're going to be able to retire on that money. Now, is that the case? So let's go back to the first example. Say we do manage to invest $1,000 every single month for years and decades to come. It is going to take us 24 years. Let's say we get paid 10% APR on that investment. It's going to take us 24 years to reach $1 million, right? So once you reach that landmark, you could say, well, now I'm going to just retire on that money. And you basically have two options. You can either spend that money, hoping that you don't run out of it before you die, or the second option, which is the much more sensible option, would be to invest that money and live off the interest payments, right? So let's do the example. Say you have $1 million and you plan to retire in 24 years. Let's say you get 10% on that investment. That would be $100,000 every year worth of interest payments. You could think to yourself, well, $100,000 every year is a lot of money. I could definitely live off that money, right? But here's the catch. Here's the problem that most of these influencers consistently fail to mention when they give this advice, when they tell us to invest for the long run and whatever. They consistently fail to mention the massive problem of inflation. Now, why is inflation a massive problem? Because inflation erodes the value of our money as years go by. So if you do reach the $1 million mark, can you actually spend the $100,000 you get paid every year in interest? The answer is no, because assuming that inflation stays consistent at around, let's say 4% in real terms, what that means is that every year your $1 million loses 4% of its purchasing power, of its value, right? And so to maintain the purchasing power of your initial investment, you need to add 4% to the $1 million every year just to maintain the value of that money. And so of the $100,000 you get paid in interest every year, you really can only spend $60,000 because 4%, $40,000, you need to put back in the bucket just to maintain the value of your investment, which means you're left with 60. Now, if I tell you that if you invest for 24 years just to be able to retire on 60K a year, that already doesn't sound so appealing, right? It doesn't really sound so cool, right? I mean, you can definitely live off 60,000 every year, but you're gonna have to live a frugal life. Now, here's the major problem, which is the second part of this problem. In reality, what you need to think about is how much is $1 million gonna be worth in 24 years? Right? I mean, $1 million sounds like a lot of money, but if you think about it, it's not really the number that matters. What matters is the purchasing power of that number. So $1 million today in 2024 is a lot of money, yeah. But 20 years ago, $1 million was way more money than it is today, in the sense that the purchasing power of $1 million 20 years ago was way more than it is today. You could buy way more stuff, basically. And in the next 24 years, the purchasing power of that $1 million, because of inflation, is going to continue to go down, which means that it's going to buy you less and less stuff as time progresses. How much less stuff, you might be wondering? Well, this is an equation you can do to calculate exactly that. And so let's assume that inflation continues to stay, let's say, around 4% on average every year for the next 24 years. By the way, I believe that's a very conservative estimate because it could very well go above that, like it did these past few years. How is that going to impact the value of the $1 million you plan to retire on in the future? If we assume inflation stays consistent at around 4%, that means that your $1 million in 24 years are going to have the purchasing power equivalent to $450,000 of today's money. Now, that already doesn't sound good at all, honestly. If we do the same example as before, and we estimate that we can get 10% on that investment every year, that would be $45,000, of which we have to take away 4% of the total investment just to maintain the purchasing power of the original 450. So we have to take away 18,000 out of the 45 we get paid in interest every year. That leaves us with only $27,000 to live off for the rest of the year. So you understand what I'm saying? If you actually manage to save 1 million bucks in 24 years, that's going to be the equivalent of 450,000 of today's money, of which you can only spend $27,000 a year. That is definitely not enough to live comfortably, to have a decent, comfortable life once you retire. And we're talking about the returns on an investment that you have been doing for 24 years of your life. This is the major problem with this advice, with this strategy. And this is something that these influencers, I believe, always tend to ignore or forget when they tell us to do this as a strategy to retire in the future. They always fail to mention how inflation is going to affect that strategy in the next couple of decades. And so this is my conclusion from this whole thing. I believe these influencers are giving us advice that was useful for our parents and grandparents, right? Like 50, 30 years ago, this advice might have made sense, right? But the world has changed quite a lot in the last half a century or the last 30 years even. Today, the tools that we, our generation, have to build financial independence, financial freedom, and to be able to retire in the future are different tools from the ones our grandparents and parents used. And so what I plan to do is to look at what these guys did that got them financial independence. These influencers telling us to do this did not become wealthy by doing that. They didn't invest for 30 plus years to become wealthy or financially independent, because most of them are not even 30 years old. So of course, we should look at what they're doing rather than the advice that they're giving us and telling us to follow. And what they did is they took advantage of the tools of our time, of our generation, which were not available to our grandparents and parents. What are those tools? Well, the internet, blockchain technology, AI, social media, online businesses. This is how most of these influencers actually build their wealth. Just to give you an example so you can understand this, for our grandparents, it took roughly 3 yearly salaries to be able to buy a house, an average house. For us, for this generation, it takes 7 yearly salaries to be able to afford an average home. So quite literally, things are more than twice as hard for us than they were for them. This is just a fact, by the way. This is not an opinion. This is just a fact of the matter. I know that boomers tend to say that our generation is a crystal generation, that we're a bunch of lazy people and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is that things are more than twice as hard for us as they were for them back in the day. So given this fact, why should we follow the same strategies our grandparents and parents followed, considering that things are completely different today, are much harder today, by the way? So I guess this is the whole point of this video, and this is what I wanted to leave you guys with. I mean, I'm not saying this is bad advice. All I'm saying is that you should have the whole information to be able to make an informed decision and evaluate if the best way to move forward, the best strategy for you is to replicate or try to replicate what your grandparents did. For my part, I intend to leverage the tools of our time that, again, were not available 50 years ago to try to reach my goals, and hopefully you can do the same. Please let me know in the comments what you guys think about this whole thing. It would actually be very interesting to spark a conversation between, normal, regular, everyday people instead of just influencers that seem to live in a completely different world, or bubble rather. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Please leave your comments down below. I'll be more than happy to respond to every single one of them, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care.